So revenge is a popular narrative in our world. Revenge makes sense to all of us. Like, raise your hand if you've ever been hurt emotionally, physically, or any other way by someone. Yeah, and we all want to punch them in the face. Like, that's a thing. You weren't supposed to raise your hand for that, but I appreciate your honesty. So I get it. Like, we all have that. That's normal. Now, some of it is healthy. Like, some of it is going like, there's a natural desire for justice to happen in a moment. So some of it's healthy. But let's be honest. Most of what we want isn't the healthy justice part. Like, when you listen to songs about revenge, it's not like, we hope you get justice. It's songs like, it's too late to apologize. I mean, like, that's the thing that happens. Or it's like, it's done, man. Like, whatever I'm going to do to you. Or you've got that song, it's a song, if you've ever heard the whole thing, where somebody's been pressed down, and they come up, and through the verse of the song, they talk about all the stuff they've overcome, and then the chorus just goes, and all I do is win, 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 no matter what. And he's going, man, like, I rose up and took you. Like, that is a common thing. It's not justice, it's revenge. You see it in movies all the time. As a matter of fact, in movies, there's two narratives for revenge. One of them is the direct approach. It's the thing where somebody's been hurt, and I hurt them back. Like, that's the direct approach. It's where you see movies like if you watch the new movie The Foreigner with Jackie Chan. Like, Jackie Chan's daughter is killed, and then he just kind of goes scorched earth on everyone and kills everything. Like, there's a part of us that goes like, yep, I get that, makes sense to me. Or the greatest movie of all time, and if you disagree, get out. All right, Braveheart. Like, it's the greatest. Like, you kill his wife, he will wreck your country. Like, that's just the way that things happen, and you go, I get that. Direct approach. But there's also the indirect approach to revenge. It's not the I'll punch you in the face. It's you made me little, you hurt me, you wounded me, and I'm going to raise up in spite of you, and I'm going to be a success even though you tried to hold me back, and that will show you. You get it in such movie classics as Legally Blonde. When Elle Woods, who is looked down upon by everyone for being a dingy blonde girl, raises up through her legal college training and then wrecks everything. Or a little bit more believable, Erin Brockovich. I mean, this just strong woman who everybody looks down on, everybody thinks she can't do anything, and she rises up to achieve something great, and in the end she gets to go, check it out, I win. And those two narratives are super popular. We see both of them in the life of the family of Joseph. Before we get into the whole story of Joseph that we've been talking about, you see the direct approach by his brothers. He has two brothers, well, he has multiple brothers, but two of his brothers, Levi and Simeon, are two of the oldest brothers, and their sister Dinah is raped. And they take the direct approach to revenge. They go and kill the person who raped her. Then they kill that person's family, and then they kill and destroy their village. They are, if they were serial killers, would be called the overkill killers. They go all out. And it's really just revealing some difficult things, some bad things in their heart. So much so that later, when God is calling leaders from amongst this family, their father looks at them and says, I'm going to pass you over because you're too dangerous. Your heart is too dark. And so it makes sense when you have guys that have a toxic heart like that, when Joseph wrongs them, what's their first reaction? Kill him. Direct approach for revenge. And so we see the story. If you don't know the beginning of the story of Joseph, it looks like this in Genesis chapter 37. And I want to kind of walk you through it. Starting in verse 12, it says, his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. Then Israel, which is their dad, said to him, go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing. They saw him in the distance. Why? Because he's wearing that stupid coat. And they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, oh, look, here comes the dream expert. Let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And we can say that a vicious animal ate him. And then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him. And he said, hey, let's not kill him. Don't shed his blood. Here's a way more humane thing. Let's throw him into one of the pits in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. We'll just let him starve to death or whatever. Let an animal eat him, intending to rescue him from them and return to his father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's robe. Then they took him and they threw him into the pit. Now check this out. I love this. The pit was empty and without water. Now that seems like an odd detail, but the reason is because this pit was a cistern used for gathering rainwater. Had it been partially used, it would have been a much softer landing. Instead, it's like they chunked him down into a pit of concrete. It is painful. It is difficult. That's why that detail's in there. God gives us little subtle details. And then they sat down and had a meal. That is jacked up. Like they just chunked their brother into a hole. He is out down there probably going, "Oh God, get me out! You know the code thing, JK." Like he's yelling, he's hurting, he's in pain, and they're like, "Pass the Doritos." Like that's what's going on with these guys. That's how dark their heart is. They sat down and had lunch over the screams of their younger brother. And there was a caravan, and when they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And Judah said, now keep this guy in mind, this is the planner. This is the guy that puts everything in motion. He's going to come back in a minute. Judah said, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Instead, let's get some profit out of this. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother after all. He's our own flesh. And his brothers agreed, and his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. So they tried the direct approach. We're mad at you, we're coming after you. Joseph instead, all of the time throughout his story, what we've seen so far is that Joseph will have the indirect approach at revenge. He is sold into slavery and he ends up in Potiphar's house. He is a slave in Potiphar's house, and in that place he doesn't punch back, he doesn't fight back, but he rises up to an elevated position of power. And in this way he can go, hey, I overcame an obstacle. And when he gets accused of rape falsely and thrown into prison, he rises up through the ranks of the prison to be the guy in charge of the prison. And in doing so, he gets to say, hey, I have taken my revenge by elevating myself, and I can show you, here's what I did. Now, at the end of that story, which we covered a couple of weeks ago, where we left Joseph was two guys got thrown into prison, the cupbearer and the baker. And he interprets dreams for the cupbearer and the baker. He says, one of you, the cupbearer, is going to be restored to Pharaoh, and then the other one, the baker, is going to die. And it happens exactly as he says. And he looks at the cupbearer and says, hey, dude, when you go and back to Pharaoh, remember me. And then the end of that particular chapter, it ends with this sentence. And he forgot Joseph. Yeah. And you go, man, this guy raises up. Every time there's adversity, he rises back up. And then there's more adversity, and he rises up. And now it's just kind of sad. But here's the thing. God doesn't want our hurts to hold us back. God doesn't want bitterness to get entrenched in our heart. When we allow bitterness and anger and resentment to get inside of our heart, it is like a fire burning inside you. And when you allow bitterness in your life, you're stoking a fire that in the end will only burn you. We see that in Hebrews chapter 12, where God is going to speak to us. It says, see that no one misses the grace of God, that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. He said, when you let bitterness grow up in your heart, you won't just get you. You'll burn you up, and then you'll burn the people around you. That's what will happen. And so how do we deal with this then? Because let's be honest, forgiving some of the people in our life is hard. Amen? So the first thing is to admit your pain. Let me kind of sum up what happens in Joseph's story starting in chapter 41. So he's left in prison, right? Everybody with me? And so in chapter 41, Pharaoh has a dream. It is kind of a trippy dream. Okay? He has a dream about fat cows and skinny cows, and he doesn't know what's going on. And he calls in all of his head guys and says, somebody decipher this dream. And no one can do it. And then the cupbearer goes, wait a second. There was a dude. I met him in prison. He has the ability to interpret, bless you. He has the ability to interpret dreams. And so they go to get Joseph. They clean him up. They shave him. They put him in the presence of Pharaoh. And he goes, hey, I heard that you can interpret dreams. And he goes, yeah, I can't do anything. Which is not a good opening line. You feel like they're just going to throw him right back in prison. He says, if anybody can interpret your dream, it'll be God. God will get the glory for whatever happens next. Just want you to know that. And so he interprets his dream. And he says, so here's what your fat cow, skinny cow thing means. You're about to have 7 years of incredible plenty all throughout Egypt. You're going to flourish like you've never flourished. And then you're going to have 7 years of the worst famine that you've ever seen or ever heard of. And then, after interpreting his dream, this guy that they just pulled out of jail looks at the most powerful man on the planet at the time and says, now, thank you. I appreciate that you've listened to me as I interpret your dream. Let me give you a management solution that I would suggest. Like, why would you listen to this guy? We just pulled him out of prison. And he goes, here's what I would do. I would find somebody really, really smart that I would hire, and during your 7 years of plenty, I would have that guy control all of the food and resources, and I would have him store up a ton of it so that when you get to 7 years of famine, that guy can help distribute food, and everyone will live, and no one will starve to death. And Pharaoh goes, that's an excellent idea, and I'm just the guy for the job. You. And so this guy goes from prisoner in a day to the second most powerful man in Egypt in a day. Once again, he raises up. Now, here's what happens in that moment. He gets the clothes, and he gets the signet ring. He gets a new chariot. He gets a new Egyptian name, a new Egyptian home, and he gets a new Egyptian wife. He is rolling. Everything is coming up great. And here's what theologians oftentimes will do with Joseph, is they want to give him a Christ image. In other words, they want to give Joseph an image of a guy who does nothing wrong. But that's not really the story of Joseph. Joseph is a flawed character just like the rest of us. And here's how we know. Because at this point, about 20 years has passed since he was sold into slavery, and we get a glimpse of his heart and where he really is. Everything looks good on the outside, but there's a bitter root growing up, and we get it, of all things, through the names of his children. He names one of his children Manasseh, which basically means, it's too late to apologize. He says, man, I'm not, listen, forget all of y'all. That's what it means. And the other guy's name means, and all I do is win, no matter what. Got people dancing, that's cool. Some of y'all are lost. It's okay, Google it later. He names his two kids, forget all of you. And the other one, I will win at everything. He's got a toxic heart. When you name your kids vengeful names, you've got a toxic heart. And here's the deal. Naming your firstborn son forget you clearly means you haven't forgotten anything. Because it's going to come up every time you call your kid. Like if you're like, I don't want to think about Mexican food anymore, but I want to name my firstborn son Fajita. It's going to happen in your life over and over. You're going to have a hard time forgetting. And that's what happens here. And so let me just ask this, because I think it's important. He has to acknowledge something, and I wanted to ask you to acknowledge it. And I couldn't help but think, Waterboy. Okay, my buddy Mark Poland helped me remember this. Have you ever seen the Waterboy? Can you put that up real quick?
Somebody hurt you, my boy. Who hurt you? You tell mama who hurt you.
Okay, I just had this. Who hurt you, Bobby Boucher? I just am curious for you. Who hurt you? Family? Friend? Neighbor? An old relationship? Coworker? Who hurt you? Abused you? Neglected you? Took from you? Undermined you? Talked bad about you? Inflicted emotional, physical, and spiritual pains? Who hurt you? Who is it that in your mind, if you're being honest, you go, Jason, I get all this forgiveness stuff, but if you're asking me to forgive that person, that is impossible for me. Let me tell you, I completely agree with you. It is, however, not impossible for God. And the God of everything, if you are a Christian, lives inside of you. Amen. And gives you the power to forgive in an impossible situation. I'm not saying it's easy, but here's the thing. Not forgiving is a cancer. My favorite quote about bitterness and unforgiveness is it's like drinking a poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't work. Now I get people all the time, they come to me and they go, somebody wronged me, Jason. I forgave him. I still want to hurt him though. I still want to punch him in the face. Okay. Jason, I forgave him, but I'm still bitter about it. It's hard sometimes to let these things go. Like we mentally want to do it, but we spiritually struggle to release that. Here's what I love about Joseph's story that we're going to see. Joseph is going to forgive and he's going to get rid of bitterness. And by the end of the story, he is going to comfort the abusers of him. And you would ask this question, and I ask this question. How is that possible? The first thing is change your view. Change your view of the story. See, the same famine that makes Joseph incredibly famous is the famine that is starving his family to death back home. And what ends up happening, if you're familiar with the story, is there's this moment in the story where his brothers realize that somebody in Egypt has all the food, and all of his brothers come to Egypt to get food. Now, you remember, they think Joseph is dead. And so they go to the second in command, the guy who's distributing food there in Egypt, and they bow at his feet and beg for food. They don't recognize him. Apparently, there is a difference between how you look at 17 and 30. And it's a thing that happens if you're unaware. Yeah. Not only that, he is now dressed and looks like an Egyptian. He has the name of an Egyptian. They don't remember him as they stand before him, but he does. Oh, man. Isn't that the dream scenario for us? Someone's wronged me, and now they sit at my feet under my power. And you just want to go like, guess what? Here's Joseph! And you die now. Because it's too late to apologize. Or you look at them and go, hey guys, you don't know who I am. It's your brother. I control the food. Go home and die. Starve to death. See ya. Because I won. And you expect that to happen. And then this unimaginable moment happens. In the text, it's summed up in 4 words. He remembered the dream. Here's what I mean. He sees his brothers bowing to him, asking for food and grain, and it occurs to him, for the first time in 20 years, I've seen this before. And he goes back to his 17-year-old self and goes, wait a minute, I saw a dream where each of my brothers, represented as a stalk of grain, bowed to me. Mm-hmm. I've seen this before. Now, why is that important? Why is that? And I didn't get it until this study. And so I just want to tell you this. In that moment, something happens. He realizes, I'm not in Egypt because you hurt me and I managed to make something of myself. I'm in Egypt because 20 years ago, God told me this is exactly where he needed me. Amen. God guides my life, not you. And the right understanding of God, the right understanding of who God is and how God works, gives you the power to forgive. Listen to in Genesis 45, verses 5 through 8, he says this. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here. That's a stupid sentence. Don't be grieved or angry with yourself for selling me here. Why? Because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. God used the acts of evil men. Does God okay with evil being done? No, God will judge it. But God used the acts of evil men to preserve life. It says, for the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there will be 5 years with more without plowing and harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by great deliverance. For therefore, it was not you who sent me here. It was God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord to his entire household, and ruler over the land of Egypt. In his mind, for years, his brothers were these monsters that had control over his life. And in this moment, Joseph realizes that God was in control the whole time. And it's awesome. And that leads us to understanding this. We have to trust God's timing. When we've been wronged, when we go through trials, don't we all have our own time frame for when we want revenge? Like, we want it to happen when? Right now. And sometimes we need to learn to wait. And so here's what I want you to do. As you think about your trials, your struggles in life, I want you to learn 4 words. It could be worse. Say it with me. It could be worse. So when you walk out here and you go down to the parking lot to get into your busted car, the one that you have to do weird stuff in order to get it to start sometimes. That busted car that's got paint chipped and all that other stuff, and you can't afford to get into another car, I want you to look at that car that you see as a burden and go, it could be worse. I could have no car. I could be walking. I could live in Rockwall, work in Dallas, and have to walk to work. It could be worse. When you go to your house, and don't we love our houses until we visit other people's houses? Like, that happens to me all the time. My house is awesome. And then you go visit somebody else's house, like, man, our house stinks. When you go and you stand in your house and you go, man, I got this problem in my house. As if nobody else has issues with their house, but I've got a leak here and this thing, and I don't know what's going on in my kid's bathroom, but we've lived in our house since April. They've broke the toilet handle 4 times. I don't know what aggressive flushing method they're using, but it's happened over and over and over again. And you just go, man, my house is broke. The toilet handle's broke again. This thing's not. And you just kind of go through that, and then I want you to think, it could be worse. I want God to recover me from whatever trial this is, but you know what? I could not be in a house. I could be homeless. I could be on the street. It could be worse. When you're sitting there and ladies, you look at this woman and you go, oh, to have a body like hers. Guys, when you look at this dude, you go, oh, to have muscles like his. It could be worse. You could not have the ability to stand or to move. Health could be taken from you altogether. When you wake up in the morning and you're lying on your pillow next to your spouse and you open your eyes and look across your pillow at that other person, just think, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Some of you are like, is he about to say this? No, I'm just kidding. It's not. Don't do that. They're a gift from God. Stop it. All right, here we go. It could be worse. It's easy to blame God for stuff that's not happening the way you want it to in your life. But here's the deal, and this is what Joseph gets, is that God got involved in the story of Joseph. And the path to Joseph's blessing came through the hardships. Not around. We all want the way around, right? God, just give me the path to get to you and to your blessings without anything going wrong, and I don't have to make any struggles. But the path to the blessings for Joseph, according to God himself, came through the hardships. And can the same not be true for you? If you want to understand forgiveness, I'm going to tell you the most key component for you. You need to remember the cross. Yeah. And I know that's just a thing that we say in church. But here's what the power of the cross of Jesus Christ does. The power of the cross of Jesus Christ allows us as people to go from seeing those who have wronged us as the monsters who have ruined our life to seeing them as people who desperately need God. And that's what happens in this moment for Joseph. The monsters of his childhood suddenly needed the grace of God. Can you say that? Joseph essentially looks at them and says, you did evil to me. But I have the resources to forgive you because you don't run my story. God does. And there are some that'll be in this room and say, Jason, you don't know the details of my story. And you're right. You don't know how bad certain things have been and how much I've been hurt by certain individuals. And I don't discount that. I've heard some horrific stories in 20 years of ministry. But can I just tell you this absolute truth? And I wish it wasn't true because it would be so much easier for me and for you. If you live in the freedom of the cross, you don't have the right not to forgive. That's right. That's a hard one to amen, isn't it? It's true. Mm-hmm. If you live in that, you don't have the right not to forgive. Jesus died on the cross for the worst moment of your life. He died to set the prisoners free, and the prisoner is you. Yep. And let me tell you what happens here that I don't think we remember all the time. A couple things that are in your notes. Number one, God removes our sin completely. Like, let that sink in for a minute. Some of you, you're kind of sorry. And I'm worse. Like some of you, you know what's going on in your head. You know not just the stuff you've done in your past, but how many of you would go like, hey, if we're just going to plug something into your brain and we're going to play all of your horrible thoughts on the screen, how many of you would go running out of this room? Yeah, don't raise your hands. That's cool. I got you. I think all of us would do it. And God said, I'm going to forgive you. The moment you give me your life, I'm not asking you to be good. I'm asking you to receive my grace. And when you receive my grace, I'm going to cleanse you from everything you have ever done wrong, everything you are doing wrong, and everything you ever will do wrong. And in that moment, and for the rest of eternity, you will stand blameless before me. And no matter what you've done, he removes our sins completely. And then here's my favorite part. And then he forgets them immediately. Man, that is good.
Yeah.
Some of y'all ain't getting this. I'm just telling you. Like we do it all the time. So if Jason, my brother Jason is right here down, if he wrongs me, I can be like, man, I forgive you, bro. But, I got my eye on you. Yeah. I ain't gonna let you get me again. God goes, you've wronged me? When? Yeah. Well, God, I just told you about it. I don't remember. How do you not remember? Choose not to. Yeah. God can literally take you in a day because of his grace and have you be absolutely horrible with nothing redeeming, and in the same day, you see it in Joseph's life, in the same day, raise you up to something and give your life purpose and meaning forever. Man, that is the power of the cross. Listen, God can take the worst moment in human history, the outright murder of Jesus Christ, and use it to redeem something beautiful in that story and in our life. Just imagine what he can do in your story. That's unbelievable. And here's the thing. I know that it's hard to release our offenders, but Jesus' love is greater than any offense. Amen. Any offense. You can't out-sin the grace and the power of the cross. Any offense. And when we get that, man, when we get that about us, it propels my life in a direction. It begins to move me because God is powerful and loving and forgiving. And so when I attach my life to that God, my life becomes powerful and loving and forgiving. That's what happens. And this was the big one for me. It hits us when we look at what we've been given compared to what I deserve. Oh, come on. Y'all ain't with me. All right, so listen. I'll spend time thinking about these sentences, okay? So I need you to stay with me here, okay? This hits us when we look at what we've been given compared to what we deserve. Man, grace is dangerous. Grace takes messed up people and sets them free. Grace is excessive. It goes beyond anything you can comprehend. Grace is scandalous. Grace is such a scandal that it will take the worst human beings that have ever lived and give them hope in Jesus Christ. That doesn't even sound fair in our culture. It is a scandal. When you get the grace of the cross and the forgiveness of Jesus, it changes your view of your past. It changes your view of your present. It changes your view of your future. And more importantly, it should change your view of other people. One of my favorite movies. I said this 2 Easters ago. Man, I love the movie Taken. Have you never seen the movie Taken? Man, you should watch it. This is great. It's such a great picture. Imagine this movie. If you don't know anything about the movie, the girl, she goes on vacation and she's stolen. And Liam Neeson's on the phone, and he gets on the phone with the kidnapper. And he tells him, oh man, I've got a particular set of skills. And then he says those lines. I love it. I will come for you. I will find you. And I will kill you. So good. Like as a dad, you go, yeah, do it. You get excited. And then he goes into another country. He loads up and he goes over there and he just destroys everything in his path. He is ripping down stuff. He is blowing up stuff. He goes to where where drug dealers are. He goes out on the streets. He goes to where people are doing sex trafficking. He goes into every place and he does damage. You could give that guy a thumbtack and he could take out an army. Like, he is just doing relentless stuff, going after his daughter. And I love the moment where he gets into the same room as the guy he was on the phone with, but the guy he was on the phone with doesn't know that Liam Neeson's in the room. And then he hears Liam Neeson talk because he has that weird voice. He's like, hello. And he's like, oh, crap. I mean, like, he knows it's over. It is over. And at the end, he rescues his daughter and he takes her home. Now imagine how insane it would be if 2 weeks later, sitting in her bedroom, she said, I just don't know if anybody loves me. Girl, have you seen the movie? Look what Liam did for you. How can you say, I don't know if I'm loved, when that man burnt a nation for you? How can we deny the forgiveness of God to someone else when we know we have had that forgiveness given to us? It's impossible. It makes no sense. Last point, I just want to say this. My prayer is that you would work to make things right, not to right a wrong. See, forgiveness is something that you can do alone, but reconciliation takes two people. And sometimes that's difficult because sometimes you get to a place where you're ready to reconcile, but the other person's not yet ready to reconcile. And so you have to wait for the timing to be right. And sometimes that requires patience. And so in the story of Joseph, and I'll just kind of wrap up with this, is kind of concluding the story for you. In the story of Joseph, Joseph at this point, he's ready to forgive, but he doesn't know yet where his brothers are. See, the last time he'd run into his brothers, they were the slave traders that sold their youngest brother, who was their father's favorite, into slavery and then had lunch. He doesn't know where they are. And so I just want to sum up for you what happens in Genesis chapters 42 through 50. See, Joseph decides, I need to know what's wrong, what's going on with my brothers. Where's their heart at now? And he sets up a test. He says, I tell you what, hey, you have any other brothers? And they said, yeah, we have one brother. He's our youngest brother, Benjamin. He already knows this. He says, I want you to go back and I want you to bring him to me. Bring him to me to prove that your story is real because I think you're spies. And so they go back home and they get their youngest brother, Benjamin. Now, why is Benjamin significant for Joseph? He is the only one of the brothers that shares the same mother as Joseph. Not only that, the Bible will tell us in the story that he, Benjamin, that youngest son, has now become the father's favorite. He's the new Joseph. And so he says, I want you to bring him to me. And when he gets there, they're talking and he has a cup, a gold cup planted into one of their backpacks. And he says, one of you has stole from me. And the brothers say, no, none of us have stolen. If you found something we've stole from you, you can kill us. Well, they start going through the backpacks and they find the cup in Benjamin's bag. And the brothers immediately say, whoa, 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 don't do anything to him. We'll all just be your slaves. And he says, I don't want all of you. I just want Benjamin. Now, here's the thing that after 42 years of life, I have never gotten until doing this series. Do you see what he's done? He set up the same scenario that he was in 20 years ago. 20 years earlier, he's the younger brother. 20 years ago, he's the father's favorite. 20 years ago, they get a chance to make a decision about him, and when they do, they sell him into slavery. And now, he has set up the exact same scenario to see if they've changed. Will they abandon their little brother again? And in that moment, the most beautiful part of the story happens. Judah, I told you he would come back in the story. The planner that put everything in place to ruin Joseph's life, he steps forward and says, take me instead. And in that moment, Joseph knows, I'm not the only one who's changed in the last 20 years. This one now has a heart to rescue instead of enslave his brother. He has a selfless heart to lay his life down for the sake of another. And the Bible says that Joseph weeps so loud, the entire house of Pharaoh is filled with the sound. And they are reconciled. They're reconciled through two things, truth and grace. Joseph looks and says, you did this to me and it was painful, it hurt. And they don't deny it, they acknowledge it and say, you're right, we did that and we are sorry. And then both sides extend grace to the other. When you understand the gospel, it turns love loose from you. It unleashes forgiveness for you because you have been loved and forgiven. It is natural now for you to love and forgive. And here's something that I want you to know as you seek out who you need to forgive in your life. They can't always repay you, but you can always forgive. Most of the wounds of our life, we can't, if they could go back in the past and fix it and do it over again, many of those people would, but we can't. They can't fix what they broke, but we can forgive today. And that's important. And so my challenge for you would be this. Pray for the people that have hurt you. Now, Crossroads, I love you, but I know you. So let me just tell you this. I know some of you are like, yep, ain't no problem. I'll pray for him. I'm going to pray for him to get hemorrhoids or rabies. Like, I'm going to pray for him. The Bible tells us something different. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, Jesus makes one of the most shocking statements in all of Scripture. He says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That would have sent no shockwaves through anything. It makes total sense. But he says this, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now some of you guys go, man, I've been praying for this person for years. They haven't changed at all. That's true. And if I'm going to be honest with you, your prayer may never change them. But it will change you every time.